Hello, hello. This is the my artifact episode number 3816. Today's date is January 14, 2026. It's been almost like morning at 9:56 p.m. I just had a breakfast, a very heavy breakfast. Okay, like I ate how many dosa I ate? I ate like four dosa I ate. Okay, yeah. Then after that, I I ate one of the biggest dosa. Like basically, what I did is that usually the dosa that we have is a very thick, okay, or very thin. Sorry, very thin. Sorry, very thin. So I kind of like a made a dosa like a thick. Okay, I see this kind of like a dosa in a kind of like a somewhere they called it set dosa or sponge dosa. I wanted to make that dosa. So what I did, there is a remaining batter. So I was kind of like a put that dosa and kind of like a make it kind of like a very thick dosa. Okay, yeah. And that dosa I made like a, basically that thick dosa is a combination of three dosa. Okay, yeah, that is thick dosa. We call them as a set dosa or sponge dosa. Okay, I made that dosa and I ate that dosa. Oh my god, this is the one dosa is kind of like a feel like so heavy that I already ate almost like a five dosa, which is a normal dosa, and then I ate this thick dosa, which is equivalent to three dosa. So probably I ate almost like a eight dosas, eight dosa, and that's why I'm kind of like a very heavy breakfast that I did. Okay, yeah. That's why I'm kind of like walking in here. Probably it's kind of like a felt really good to kind of like a walk because I just ate very heavy breakfast. Whatever. Like dosa has always been kind of like a really good breakfast. Okay. I don't know why, but it's kind of like a bit tasty and things like that. Like like if I'm kind of like a rank which one is kind of like a very best breakfast, then probably dosa might be like a really good in every possible situation or every scenario. Whatever. Okay, let's just jump right into the question. Alright, yeah. Okay, the question is, what if friction stories influence history? Oh, okay, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Okay, yeah, first of all, what exactly is this question, and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always been really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a forced me to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, or when I try to create that reality inside of my mind, I'm kind of like utilizing my knowledge, information, and experience that I've been through, and somehow it kind of like a felt good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's a raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. It's just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Now regarding about the question says that ki, what if the fictional story influence our history? What exactly is this question about? The question is actually about a kind of like a friction story is kind of like a had any kind of like impact in our history or impact in our present or things like that. Is it have it? I'm not really sure, but I'm gonna kind of like give you a couple of scenario that you might gonna understand what exactly is this question about, and I'm gonna tell you my personal experience regarding about that. Okay, so the movie name Avatar James Cameron movie, first part was released in probably 2000 somewhere 2011 or 9 maybe, I'm not really sure at that time. 2011, yeah, 2011. Okay, yeah. And I watched that movie, Avatar. This movie was really amazing. The graphics at that time, this is the one of the really amazing VFX movie at that time in 2011 probably. And it was like a, I'm not really sure, is it 2011? Let me google it. Okay, so we Avatar movie. It's 2009 movie, yeah. So Avatar movie was actually 2009. Okay. So this is kind of like a simply movie that I watched, and at that time the graphics was like, oh my god. Now in this particular movie there is a scene, and that scene was kind of like impact me a lot. What is that scene? In this particular scene, the main character, Jake Sully, was kind of like a recording a log video. Oh yeah. Now what is exactly that log video? So basically, let me tell you story. It's not a spoiler, by the way. It's actually released on 2009. If you didn't watch it, watch it. It's not a spoiler movie. Whatever. So in this particular movie, all the people, all the humanity actually went to another planet called Pandora. Now Pandora has a very tricky atmosphere. Yes, human can able to be survive, but uh, his memory will get fog. Okay, means like that if you survive on this planet for at least like a 6 months, then you kind of like a suddenly forgot everything that what exactly happened before 6 months and things like that, because the atmosphere is kind of like a that way and your memory is not able to recognize and things and that and that. So humans are kind of like invented such a thing called a log video. So what is that a log video is that the people who actually went to that particular planet, they actually kind of like simply record a log video. In that log video, they kind of like says this thing that what exactly happened throughout the day. They kind of like mention everything, even the secrets and things and that and that. That log video is a kind of like a bitterly secret. Okay, yeah, no one knows that thing, but they have to be recorded because after a 6 months you might gonna lose all those memories and things like that. So if we need kind of like that information, that log video was kind of like a really good. So they kind of like mention a log. Okay, yeah, my log video, and they kind of like a talk about everything. And this is a kind of like a scene that Jake Sully was kind of like a telling that the way that he kind of like experienced with the Navi people and things and that and that. Okay. Now this kind of like a very hit me hard. I realized that what if I could do this thing? Yeah, like I could kind of like simply record a kind of like a simply day that what exactly happened and things like that. Okay, but we already have that concept. We have called as a diary. Okay, yeah, but diary is a kind of like a simply very traditional way as well as very constrained way. What's a constrained way? A constrained way means like that when you wrote the diary or when you want to write the diary, there is a lot of thing really required. First of all, a diary. Another thing, pen. Another thing, effort required to write the diary. Okay, yeah. And after all those things you have, you cannot able to express everything on the diary because it's limited by a lot of things, because the way that you think and way that you write, the speed is kind of like a very varies. Like you think very rapidly but you write very slowly, and you cannot write all your thoughts by words. It's not, it definitely kind of like a create a constraint and things like that. So instead of writing, what if we could kind of like a record a video probably? So there is a kind of like idea that came into me that I should supposed to be record kind of like a video regarding about what exactly happened throughout my day and things and that and that. It's an upgraded version of diary. Okay, yeah. Now that's why I started this thing called artifact episode. Now artifact is word that came from different. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that thing, but the concept of this recording artifact is actually came from the Avatar movie. Okay, and this is because of this artifact, it kind of like a matter to me a lot, and in the future it will gonna matter to a lot of people a lot, because of this artifact, it changed me, it changed my personality, it changed everything. So the question is that does fiction story influence our history or our present? I think yes. I think yeah, that is like basically is this thing. This artifact is never really kind of like established if the Avatar movie is never really released or this concept was never really shown in the movie. Okay, yeah. And because of this concept, it kind of like somebody hit me very hard. I kind of like realized that what if I could make it kind of like a real? And right now, it's been real. This is almost like a 3,800 and something episode which is kind of like a some evidence of that key. It kind of like had so much amount of values and things and that and that. So basically is this thing, some people kind of like a simply visualize a kind of like a concept in friction story, but the scientists and kind of like a simply the people who kind of like a make this thing real, they kind of like a think that ki, what if we could make this thing real, and the rest is a history. Like I don't know, there is a kind of like a simply the concept that I heard. I'm not really sure is it exactly right or wrong. The first telephone was kind of like a somebody introduced by the Graham Bell. Okay, yeah. Graham Bell is a kind of like a somebody person who actually invented the telephone. Okay. Now, at that time, telephone was a far too big, very heavy, and obviously the range was kind of like a very, very kind of like a not really that much, but it's a very kind of like a somebody solve a very biggest problem, that you can communicate with the people which is actually far away from you, and that thing is kind of like a somebody really good. Now basically is this thing that the Graham Bell is actually invented this telephone. Okay, and at that time telephone was kind of like a somebody very big and things like that. Now after a year pass on, and there is a kind of like a somebody people who kind of like a something seen a kind of like a Star Trek. Okay, Star Trek is a kind of like a somebody a movie or kind of like a somebody comic book or things like that at that time. So in this friction, okay, that comic book friction, whatever it is, in this particular friction, the people who are in this kind of like a somebody comic book, they are kind of like a somebody talking by their hand. Okay, yeah, or kind of like a things, they have kind of like a very small device that they could communicate with each other, a person which actually far away and things like that. And right now they have a device called telephone, which is kind of like a far big and far heavier, that it's cannot able to kind of like a utilize as a kind of like a portable device, nothing really at all. But that particular person, I'm not really sure who is that particular person, but that particular person who kind of like a thought that what if we could kind of like a make the telephone as lighter so that it could be portable, so that we could carry everywhere and we could communicate with the people everywhere. Okay, yeah. Now this thought process actually came from that particular Star Trek comic book or Star Trek, whatever it is. Okay, yeah. And the people who kind of like make it real. And right now, rest is a history. We have this telephone, we have this smartphone that I could talk, I could communicate. Rest of the world is in my pocket. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing, all the innovation that is actually happened, not all the innovation, I'm not really say the all the innovation, but kind of like somebody that friction world, it's somewhat something influence real world. Not only in history, but it actually influence a kind of like a somebody real world too. There is a kind of like a some movie that I wanted to mention, Back to the Future 2. This is a kind of like a some movie was released in Hollywood. This movie is really good. Okay, now in this particular movie, which is actually released in 1983 maybe or 1993, I'm not really sure, which is actually released on probably 19s, like in that particular time. Okay, now in this particular movie, there is a kind of like a some scene where the main character, which kind of like a somebody have a hoverboard. Okay, yeah, it's a kind of like a skateboard, but they called it as a hoverboard. And why they called it as hoverboard? Because it literally hovered in midair. Like it really doesn't really have any kind of like a something the wheel or nothing really at all. It doesn't really have any kind of like a jet propulsion, nothing really at all. It just hover in itself. And it's kind of like something so crazy that this idea is kind of like something so crazy that people just kind of like use this hoverboard as a kind of like a skateboard, but way more advanced and things like that. By the way, that hoverboard is not kind of like a go really rapid and speed like rocket and things like that. No, but it kind of like a somebody eliminate all the resistance. Like basically a skateboard really required a kind of like a smooth road and things like that. Then and only then you could kind of like a skate very properly. Okay, yeah. If you didn't really have a smooth road, then probably that skateboard is kind of like a useless. But that hoverboard is kind of like eliminate that road. Like if you have a hoverboard, That's it. You just have to kind of like simply go, and you could kind of like simply hover anywhere in the air. You don't really require any kind of like a surface and things like that. Now, because of this thing that I saw in kind of like a something movie, it always been kind of like a really curious regarding about what if we could create this particular stuff in the real world. And we have this hoverboard today. Yeah, it's not exactly look like that hoverboard, but probably we have a drone. We have a kind of like a people who are kind of like a somebody that kid drone. They could kind of like a somebody stand there on the drone, and that drone is kind of like act as a hoverboard. Obviously, that hoverboard is a kind of like a somebody. The movie version of hoverboard is so compact, but in today's world we have hoverboard which is kind of like a far more bigger and things like that. We are trying to improvement and things like that, and probably within a maybe 100 year we might have kind of like a hoverboard which is kind of like a far less compact, which is kind of like a look exactly like a 1983 that movie Back to the Future too. So this is what it is, like a somewhat something I really think that key the friction story is a kind of like a somewhat something resonate with a kind of like a real world. There is also another example that I wanted to tell you. Another thing, Star Trek. Okay, yeah. So basically this thing that in the Star Trek movie, okay, they have a called spaceship called USS Enterprise. Okay, yeah. Now that spaceship is a very big, very huge, like literally just like it just felt like that. Oh my god, this is kind of like a somebody so big spaceship that will it be happen in real world? I don't really think so, but I'm not really sure. But I think it will be. Now, why is that? Why am I saying this thing? Like, why do you think that key? How do we supposed to kind of like build that spaceship, and should we supposed to transport this spaceship from surface to like on the space? It's not really possible. Like, look at the spaceship size. The weight of that spaceship is you cannot able to kind of like build that spaceship and kind of like a transport into the space. It's not really possible. But that's a wrong thing. That's a wrong thing. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a kind of like a scientific concept, a legit scientific concept. Okay, if you wanted to construct anything on the surface of the earth, is far more complicated than if you constructed anything on a space. Means like that, if you wanted to construct anything on the space, it's kind of like far more easier than construct anything on the surface of the planet Earth. What? What the fuck is this thing? So do you think that most of the kind of like things that easily constructed on into the space? Yeah, very easily as compared to the planet Earth. Dude, what about the material? Like literally, where would you get the material? Like you need a kind of like a steel, you need this, you need that, you need a lot of stuff. Like construction not only required just kind of like it really required a lot of material. And where do you get that material from the space? Well, that's a really good question. Okay, yeah. So basically when you see the space, it's not empty anymore. Like it's never been empty anymore. There is always been something inside in the space. So many things. There are so many asteroids, so many things, so many material are actually exist on the space. Okay, yeah. We don't need to kind of like simply grab the material from the surface or from the earth and kind of like went into the kind of like, no, nothing like at all. We already have so many meteors. We already have so many things. We just have to grab it, extract the material from it. Okay, yeah. And then utilize as a 3D printing. Literally by 3D printing you could construct this thing. Now I'm gonna kind of like a focus on 3D printing over here. Okay, in earth, if you wanted to 3D print in earth surface, you cannot able to do this thing. Why? Because earth has its own gravity, and because of its gravity the needle always point towards the direction of the gravity, so it always flow from top to bottom. So that's why most of the kind of like simply the product or most of the kind of like a 3D printing is actually established from bottom to top. Okay, bottom to top. The 3D printer that we have today are not meant to kind of like create a kind of like a somebody product from left to right or things like that. is not gonna possible, because the needle material will gonna fall somewhere. It always kind of like a fall downwards. And if you are kind of the needle, you cannot put the needle everywhere. Like you cannot put, like a needle cannot go anywhere. So basically is this thing, if you wanted to make the kind of like any kind of like a product, we have to approach from top down approach. Okay, and you have to create the kind of like a product from bottom to top. Okay, yeah. Now when you create the product from bottom to top, you have to create the support, and that support creates a kind of like a material, or kind of like a loss of material. If you still not really understanding the concept, okay, imagine a spear. Okay, imagine a spear. Okay, yeah. Now if you want to kind of like simply create a spear in 3D printer. Okay, yeah. So how do you supposed to, how that 3D printer execute that operation? It kind of like a, first of all, it create a one circle. Okay, yeah. Then it create another circle. Then it create another circle. Now basically that circle doesn't really have any support, so it creates support too. It creates support too. And because of it creates support, then it creates another circle, another circle, another circle, another circle. And that circle really requires support. So meanwhile, that needle also creates the support too. So basically what exactly happened, that key, the needle cannot go anywhere. Needle always on the top, and always kind of like a create the kind of like a something anything from top down approach. Okay, yeah. It never go kind of like a things and that is because of the gravity. But when you are in the space, there is no gravity at all. So basically when there is no gravity at all, you don't really require any kind of like assembly support, nothing really at all. So basically when you don't really require any kind of like assembly support, the needle can go anywhere. Like literally needle can go inside of the product too, literally, and kind of like a create that construct from inside, literally, just like that na, ki in the gravity, because of the gravity that we have, needle have only one way of kind of like executing the operation from top down approach. But when you are in the space, because of the less of gravity or none less, like absence of the gravity, a needle can go anywhere. And because if the needle goes anywhere, it kind of like creates the material, or kind of like only put the material on top, is because of needle can go anywhere, and we don't really require any kind of like support or things like that. And that's why we don't really require any kind of like a support. We could kind of like create much more bigger kind of like a object, far more bigger than object. Like literally because of the gravity that we have, we cannot able to create bigger object. Okay, yeah. If you wanted to create a bigger object, there is a kind of like a problem. Take an example, Burj Khalifa. Burj Khalifa is a bigger object. Okay, a bigger building, biggest building on the planet. Okay, yeah. But it comes with a lot of resistance, the gravity, its own weight and things and that. But in the spaceship, there is no gravity, there is no weight at all, there is no kind of like a resistance at all. And basically bigger the object it creates, the bigger kind of like a space and things like that. And when it kind like, it's like basically if you kind of like create a small object in the space, it's not really good. The lifespan of the small object is not really that much thing. You have to create a kind of like a bigger object, like a USS Starship, USS Enterprise. Okay, when you create the USS Enterprise that big, it's kind of like a far more convenient for the kind of like somebody that 3D modeling or 3D kind of like a 3D printer, and it's far more convenient. You can kind of like create USS Enterprise by, if you kind of like find the right sources and material and things and that, probably you can create that USS Enterprise on the spaceship, on the space, and it's far more convenient than creating this enterprise in kind of like some Earth. It's not, yeah. Do you get it? So basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, in the future, I'm not really sure what will gonna happen, but I think this will gonna happen. Like basically I seen the documentary, the people who are kind of like implementing this idea in the real world, they kind of like try to put the 3D printing technique in the kind of like a spaceship, and they might gonna develop, they might gonna do even more bigger things like that. But within maybe 100 or 200 year, we might have spacecraft or spaceship which kind of like built on the space, not in Earth. Because in the space, if you wanted to create anything, it kind of like a far more convenient in every possible scenario. And just so basically it's this thing, this idea is actually came from the kind of like a something the kind of like a fiction story, a Star Trek. Okay, yeah. So that's why it's kind of like a, some people are trying to make it real, and it will become real. It's not. So yes, take a. There are like I have so many example that I'm gonna say that fiction world is actually influenced the real world. Iron Man suit, like literally just like that, a suit can fly in its own. People are trying to make the Iron Man suit, and they make it. They are not kind of like exactly work like the fiction story, like Iron Man can kind of like a fly and things like that, but it kind of like look like that. It have some sort of LEDs and things like that. It does kind of like a somebody kind of like a somebody do its kind of like a mechanical things by itself and things like that. But yeah, it does. We have a kind of like a simply Iron Man suit in the real world, which is not exactly look like that work. It's not actually work like that. But yeah, is it because of the kind of like a lack of technology that we have and things like that? So does kind of like a things that does kind of like a somebody influence real world? Yeah, it does, dude. It does. So it's really good. Like when I try to think about this particular scenario, it just felt like that. Oh my god, I'm being kind of like a somebody like I don't know how do I supposed to explain this thing. Sometimes I just been kind of like a feel really good to be a human, because when you are human, you think a lot. You understand the perspective. I don't know how I supposed to explain. Sometimes I just kind of like a being really grateful that I'm a kind of like a human being, and I'm kind of like a think like that way, and it just felt good. Whatever. Okay, yeah, these are kind of like some innovation, but still, okay, yeah. Yes, some of the good things are actually come from the fiction world. Some of the bad things are also come from the fiction world too. Okay, yeah. It's not like basically is this thing, the life that we have is not always good things. We are kind of like some shades of gray, not are completely black, are not are completely white. We all are shades of gray, and we use this technology, or we use our thought process, or we use this kind of like a things for wrong reason too. And that is true. And we also have example, nuclear bomb. Nuclear bomb is a kind of like a things that a kind of like a thought process actually came from that. Ki what if we could kind of like create a such explosion that kind of like a wipe out that city? From that idea, we have this nuclear bomb. We have so many things that kind of like some destruction things and that and that. Now, having a weapon is a wrong thing. Like, it's not a wrong thing. Let me tell you one thing now. In today's world, peace is only established when you showcase the power. If you don't really understand this thing, no one wants to kind of like somebody hurt, or no one wants to kind of like attack United States. By the way, in today's world, not any country could kind of like somebody try to capture another country, because it's considered as a wrong things and that in every possible scenario. Okay, yeah. But still, no, like basically there is a kind of like not any kind of like a country who kind of like things that we should supposed to be kind of like attack United States. Why is that? Is because of they have power of lot of things. Not only they have nuclear power, but they have kind of like a power of kind of like a something weapons, communication, infrastructure, military hardware, and things and that. So their country is kind of like a somebody established peace is because they are actually showcase the power. Okay, yeah. Now some countries doesn't really have that power, so that's why they don't really have a peace. Example, Iraq, Iran. Okay, yeah. So basically this thing, they don't really have a weapon, they don't really have that kind of like a somebody nuclear arsenal or kind of like a modern warfare and things and that. Now because of they don't really have any kind of like a weapon that other people scared. So when the other people are not really scared of your country, then probably is this thing, they are trying to invade you, or they are trying to kind of like somebody, yeah. And also let me tell you one thing, the power you cannot able to be showcased by the weapon that you have. You can showcase the power by technology that we have, the people that we have. Like basically this thing, power is not kind of like a represent from the weapon. The power actually represent from the uniqueness from the country. The Taiwan country doesn't really have any weapon, but still no one wants to invade Taiwan, is because of that ki Taiwan is a kind of a country who kind of like a supply the supercomputer chipset, which is kind of like assembly far more useful for any other country and things like that. So this chip, this superconductor semiconductor chip are kind of like a became a powerful, that kind of like assembly the Taiwan is became kind of like a much more stronger country. And by the way, Taiwan is not even a country, by the way. Most of the kind of like a something countries are not considered as a Taiwan as a country. India is not a considered as a Taiwan country. US, any other country, very less kind of like country are kind of like a simply recognize Taiwan as a country. Why is that thing? Because like a China is kind of like a claim that ki Taiwan is our part of our territory, and if you claim Taiwan as a country, then China will not gonna do business with your country and things like that. And China is kind of like a somewhat something really essential for doing a business, getting imports and things like that, and getting export and things like that. So yeah, probably it's a far more geopolitical thing, things like that. But that is true. Okay, yeah, you actually establish peace by showcasing power. And in today's world, power is not showcased by the military hardware or things like that. Power is actually showcased by the people, their effort, their uniqueness, or their something. Okay, yeah. So that is it. That's the real world that we are thinking. And these are kind of like a stuff is also kind of like came from fiction world too. Yeah. Whatever, these are kind of like simply just thought process and things like that. Whatever, sometimes I just feel like that I am kind of like a very intelligent person that kind of like saying some sort of stuff that I am not an intelligent person. I am a fuck all person. Whatever. This is it. I should supposed to end here. Thank you.